A player Gonzaga pursued heavily out of high school is back in the transfer portal after an elite season in the Big Ten. Can the Zags land him this go-round?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Randy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, folks, the Zags are hosting Isaiah Pasha, the Delaware transfer we spoke about on Thursday's episode of Locked On Zags. He was down to his top 10. Now he's down to his top 3. Gonzaga, Texas Tech, Penn State. The plan is for them to host him after this dead period is over on April 10th. So that's kind of going to be the only update we have on him for right now. But just know if you're interested in learning more about him, Thursday's episode of Locked On Zags, we covered him. But for today, we're going to talk about 2 other transfers that we think the Zags could, should, would, might be involved in recruiting out of the transfer portal. Both of them coming from the USC Trojans. We're going to talk about each of those 2 guys. We're going to close out the show, talk about the national championship. We have the matchup set, Florida versus Houston. Talk a little bit about that game, talk a little bit about some of the Gonzaga connections in that game. Of course, Gonzaga losing to Houston earlier in the NCAA tournament. We'll talk about that. We'll close out the show a little bit talking about Mark Few not being inducted into the class of 2025 for the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame on his first go-around. We'll talk about what that means for him as well. But we're going to start the show talking about a player that Gonzaga pursued very heavily out of high school, and then he ultimately ended up choosing not to go to Gonzaga out of high school, chose not to go to Gonzaga his first time entering the transfer portal, and is now back in the transfer portal. That would be Wesley Yates. Wesley Yates is a 6'4" redshirt sophomore guard out of USC. He's a 4-star out of high school from Beaumont, Texas. Gonzaga was involved in his recruitment heavily out of Texas. He was like a top 50, top 40-ish prospect, but had a ton of attention from various really high-profile programs. The Zags made an offer to him. Auburn and Alabama had offers out to him. Baylor, Creighton, Texas A&M. It's a pretty long list of very high-profile programs that were interested in the product from Beaumont, Texas. However, he ultimately committed to Washington. So a kid from Texas, interested in both Gonzaga and Washington, ultimately ends up going to UW in part because his cousin was on staff for the University of Washington at that time. So he goes to UW. This was for not this past season, but the season prior to that. He suffers a leg injury and ultimately is not able to play a single game for the Huskies. Redshirts the entirety of his true freshman season in 2023-24. And then there's a coaching change at the end of the year for UW. They bring in Danny Sprinkle from Utah State. They revamp the entire coaching staff. And so very unsurprisingly, a player who did not play a single minute because of an injury as a freshman, who is now does not have that connection to the coaching staff that he had previously. Yates, of course, enters a transfer portal, and it was a little unclear how he would be kind of perceived in the transfer portal after not getting a chance to play for the entirety of his year, but he was a very rare player who enters the portal with 4 years of eligibility remaining. And Eric Musselman takes the job at USC after being the head coach at Arkansas. Didn't mention Arkansas, but they were also one of the programs that pursued Yates out of high school. So Eric Musselman said, well, I'd love to give this nut a crack, see if we can land you here. Yates decides, yes, I do want to go there, goes to USC, joins that Trojans program that had a completely new look roster for Coach Musselman this past season. And look, it wasn't a great year for USC. They weren't very good. I thought they were going to be better. I thought they had a chance to surprise some folks in the Big Ten, but they didn't really find their rhythm. They didn't really find the right kind of match of all these players on this roster. But that didn't have anything to do with Wesley Yates, folks. He was awesome. He was absolutely fantastic for USC this season as a redshirt freshman. It is his first season that officially counts against him playing college basketball. He played 33 games for USC, started 24 of them, played about 30 and a half minutes per game. I'm going to give you his full season stats, but we'll talk about kind of a split in his season. Overall, he finished his first year at USC, his only year at USC, averaging 14 points, 3 rebounds, about 2 assists, a little over 1 steal per game, shot about 50% on 2-pointers, was about 44% from 3, folks. That was on a little under 4 attempts per game. Dude is a straight up shooter, high level score, about 80% from the free throw line as well. And it took him some time to get going, probably still recovering from missing an entire season of game action with that leg injury at Washington. And also Coach Musselman just trying to figure out his rotations. You see a lot of players, if you look on USC's roster, who had very significant fluctuations in playing time throughout the year because it was a completely new look roster. I think they brought in 11 transfers, a couple of freshmen, basically no returners for that roster. So it was just a lot of mixing and matching as Coach Musselman kind of tried to figure out how to put all of these pieces together. Once they figured out that Wesley Yates deserved to play big minutes on this team, he went off. And the time that this split happened was right at the start of the new year. In the final 20 games of Wesley Yates' freshman season or first season at USC, starting in January 2025, Yates averaged 17.9 points per game and shot 49.5% from three. This is not a 5-game end of the season sample. This is a 20-game sample size, more than half of the year. Wesley Yates averaged 18 on 50% from three. That is staggeringly good production for a redshirt freshman playing his first collegiate action in the Big Ten, mind you, a very competitive conference. Yates dropped 30 in a road game at Purdue. It is not common to go to Mackey Arena in West Lafayette, Indiana, and drop 30 on the Boilermakers. This does not happen very often. For a 6'4" redshirt freshman guard who did this shortly after even stepping into a starting role, that is incredible. Yates also had 27 points on 4 of 4 shooting from beyond the arc in the Big Ten tournament in an overtime win that USC picked up over Rutgers, eliminating the Scarlet Knights from the NCAA tournament picture. Rutgers, of course, had the 2-star freshmen Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper on that roster. USC knocked him out of the Big Ten tournament in part because of Wesley Yates dropping that 27 points. Now, as you might imagine, a player who averaged 18 points per game for a 20-game sample while in the Big Ten, while having 3 years of eligibility left, gonna garner some attention in the transfer portal. And we don't have a huge list or anything like that yet, but rest assured, Gonzaga is not the only school who's discovered Wesley Yates and is trying to land him in the transfer portal. I know there's already a strong connection to Kentucky, and it wouldn't surprise me. Hopefully by the time you're listening to this, that has not happened, but it would not surprise me if in the very near future, Wesley Yates commits to Kentucky. If he does not, I think Gonzaga is an incredibly compelling place for him to land. We'll talk about that in a second, but he's AAU teammates with Jalen Lowe, who is a transfer from Pitt who committed to Kentucky about a week ago as I'm recording this. Lowe and Yates have already been talking on Instagram publicly, already said, should we be teammates again, as they were teammates together at the AAU level. Yates follows everybody on Kentucky's roster basically on Instagram. He's a very much a Mark Pope type player. Would not be surprised if he ends up at Kentucky. It's also worth acknowledging, with the caveat, that he entered the transfer portal with a DNC, which is a do not contact tag. Those don't necessarily mean exactly what we think they mean. A lot of players do that, kind of just hoping to quell some of the conversations and not necessarily like shutting everybody out except for one team type of deal. So I wouldn't read too much into that, but there definitely is a strong wind pointing towards Kentucky. But if it doesn't end up happening for the Wildcats, a school that already pursued him like Gonzaga could absolutely be in the mix here. And the fit is very obvious. And I mentioned the Isaiah Pasha part of this conversation because they're both 6'4" guards. And if Pasha does commit to Gonzaga, I do still think that Pasha and Yates could coexist together, but I do think that it might be a little bit difficult for Gonzaga to potentially pursue both of them. So if Pasha does end up committing to Gonzaga, I would be a little bit more surprised if Yates were to do the same, just because they're both 6'4" guards, and I think Gonzaga is trying to go away from having too many small guards. But Yates would basically be your Khalif Battle replacement. I mean, it's as simple as that. Yates is a little smaller than Battle, but he's a better three-point shooter, a more consistent three-point shooter. He didn't have a huge volume in his 1 year at USC, but shot 44% on 4 attempts per game. That's better than we ever saw from Khalif Battle throughout his career. So a better three-point shooter, an incredibly high-level athlete, similar to Battle. Very good at getting to the free throw line. Certainly not as much of a foul merchant as Battle. Doesn't get there quite as often. Doesn't shoot 93% from the line like Battle did. But I think there's a lot of similarities between Wesley Yates and Khalif Battle. And again, I think that he would certainly fit what Gonzaga wants to do. He could be a catch and shoot guy in the corner offensively. He could be somebody that they let attack off the dribble. He's somebody that I think could be a really versatile piece for Gonzaga if they were to be able to go out and get him. And again, I think the fit between him and Isaiah Pasha, if they were to be a package deal or both show up together, 2 6'4" guards may cause some people to raise their eyebrows a little bit, but honestly, I think it could work really well if the Zags were able to find a way to make this work and bring both these guys to Spokane. Well, folks, we got another player from USC that we want to talk about here who could be of interest to the Zags. If nothing else, he's got a pretty cool last name. We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, taxes used to be waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any of your money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now taxes is matching with the TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you to do every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, still talking about a pair of USC transfers, USC players in the transfer portal who could be targets for Gonzaga. We opened with Wesley Yates III, who started his career at Washington and spent last year at USC, averaging 18 points a game in the last 20 games of the season. Now we're going to talk about a guy who does also have some connection to Gonzaga, at least some connection to the WCC. No connection to me, although he does share my last name, 6'8" junior wing Kevin Patton Jr., a guy that's worth keeping an eye on. Again, no relation to Kevin Patton here, but a player that some of you may remember from his freshman season, very successful freshman season at the University of San Diego. Patton's a 6'8" wing from Temecula, California. He played at Rancho Christian High School. He was a top 150 recruit in the 2023 class at Rivals.com. A highly regarded freshman to land for Steve Lavin and the Toreros. If we're being honest, not a whole lot of things that Steve Lavin and the Toreros have done all that well during his tenure, although he has recruited high school talent pretty well for a program that doesn't typically do that. Unfortunately, they have been unable to retain said talent in the NIL and transfer portal era. But we saw a tremendous freshman season from Patton, 32 games, started half of them, 26 minutes a game, averaged just under 10 points, about 4.5 boards, 2.5 assists. He also averaged 1.3 blocks and 1.3 steals per game for the Toreros. He led the WCC in blocks per game. He was 5th in the WCC in steals per game. He was also 18th in the conference in both assists and rebounds per game. Shot 34% from 3 on about 2.5 attempts per game. There was a lot to like about Kevin Patton's lone season with the Toreros. He looked like the potential WCC all-defensive candidate. He looked like somebody who could blossom into a second team, maybe even first team caliber player. And then, as you might have expected for a player who had some pedigree coming out of high school and who had a strong freshman season, he got poached out of the transfer portal. He lands at USC with Eric Musselman. And like we talked about with Yates, Musselman struggled to kind of put together the rotation for this team. And I think ultimately, they landed 11 players in the transfer portal. Like, a couple of these guys had to know that they weren't going to get a ton of playing time. And that ends up being what happened here with Patton. He played 27 games for USC. He started 2 of them, but he only averaged 8 minutes per game. 8 minutes per game at USC as a sophomore this past season. So, of course, the overall numbers don't look great. 3 points, 1.2 boards, less than a half assist, less than a half a steal, less than a half a block per game. He did shoot 65% on 2-point attempts, but that was 1.5 attempts per game. And he did boost his 3-point shooting about 35.3% from the 3-point line. Granted, that was on just 6 of 17 on the season, so not a lot of attempts. 6 of 17 is a small enough sample that I'm not sure we read too much into it, especially considering he was 34% at USD, 35% on 17 attempts. I think you've got a pretty good sense of where he is as a 3-point shooter, which, by the way, about 35% for a 6'8" shot blocking wing is certainly not a bad thing, just not something that we're counting on being a super high part of his game necessarily. He had some big games, though. 14 points, 3 boards, 2 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks in 28 minutes against Michigan. That's a good team to put up some good defensive numbers, especially with their size in the front court. He also had 11 points on 5 of 7 shooting, along with a pair of assists and a steal in 18 minutes against the Terps, the Crab Five, this Maryland team that was also very good throughout the season. One of the reasons I wanted to bring up Kevin Patton, though, is that it's pretty easy to look at the production at San Diego and say, well, look, this is a player who obviously put up big numbers for the Toreros because they were bad and they were in the WCC. And then he kind of came crashing back down to earth, as it were, in the Big Ten for USC. Numbers weren't nearly as good. But here's the deal. His numbers were actually pretty much exactly the same. He just played less. And it's very easy to look at that. And this is a rudimentary kind of basic example to use here, but Basketball Reference keeps per 40 data. They also keep per 100 possessions data. We're going to use per 40. That means that these are his numbers extrapolated to if he played 40 minutes per game, right? So obviously he played 26 minutes per game at USD. So the numbers are only going to be slightly bigger, where he played 8 minutes per game at USC. So obviously the numbers are going to be about 5 times more than what he actually did. But here's the thing. They're kind of exactly the same. At San Diego, his per 40 data, 15.1 points, 6.8 rebounds, 3.7 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. At USC, 15.2 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, 2.2 blocks. So just to get you the reference, the points identical, 15.1, 15.2. Slightly more rebounds at San Diego, not a surprise going from the WCC to the Big Ten. About double as many assists, that is a big difference. He was a much better passer at San Diego than he was at USC. But the same 2 steals per game, 2 blocks compared to 2.2 blocks per game at USC. So realistically, you're looking at a player who was similarly effective during his time at USC, just in a much smaller role. So if you're thinking, well, again, he didn't look nearly as good at USC as he did at San Diego. He kind of did. He kind of looked the same. He just didn't play as much. And some of that may have been there were just more talented players in front of him, but I'm kind of inclined to think maybe Eric Musselman didn't play him as much as he should have. Looking at the numbers here, looking at the data, not having watched a ton of USC basketball games all the way through. I watched a handful of their games. I watched their exhibition game. He did not play in that game against Gonzaga, so we didn't get a chance to see him there. But this is a player who I think kind of checks a lot of boxes for what Gonzaga needs, who's probably flying under the radar because his actual numbers last year were pretty menial, and USC was bad, and a player who played 8 minutes per game for a bad USC team is not necessarily going to garner a ton of attention. But I think this is a bit of a hidden gem here, a bit of a diamond in the rough, if you will, and a player that the Zags staff has seen more than most people in the country. They're familiar with him. They know what he's capable of doing. They saw him at his best against San Diego, and they have a need. Patton's kind of a 3-4 hybrid. They list him as a guard. He's not really a guard. He's a 3, kind of a 4. And I think the question that Gonzaga needs to be able to answer before they commit any kind of NIL cash or roster spots to a player like Patton is, can he play the power 4 position? Can he be a small ball 4? Because Gonzaga doesn't have any 4s. They do not have any 4s on this roster right now. Braden Huff is the presumed starter at the power 4 position as of right now, with Bram Ike starting at the 5. Ismail Diani is also in the front court, but he's a 5. Frankly, all 3 of those guys are 5s. But Gonzaga's, I think, committed to trying out this Huff-Ike front court, as they should be. It worked pretty darn well for them the last couple of games of the season, but they need a power forward. Michael Ajayi gone. He entered the transfer portal. He's out the door. Ben Gregg gone. He's out of eligibility, out the door. They need somebody to fill that role. Kevin Patton, as a backup power forward who could give you minutes to spell either Ike or Huff, which we know both those guys don't have the stamina to play 30-plus minutes every night. They also both have had issues with fouls, so there's going to be playing time to go around. He could also potentially fill in at the 3. Right now, you have Jalen Warley and Emmanuel Innocente, and if he's healthy, Steele Venters, and if he's ready to go right away, Davis Fogel, kind of all in the mix there, but some of those guys are going to play some minutes at the 2. Like, they're not all just playing the 3. So there are minutes to be had at the 3. There are plenty of minutes to be had at the 4, and there's a relatively young player who has experience in the WCC, who is a decent 3-point shooter for his size, and who, most importantly, is a darn good defender. And yes, Gonzaga already has some good defensive wings on the roster in Jalen Warley and Emmanuel Innocente. They have prioritized adding depth in key areas defensively that was an issue for them last year. But why not get a little bit more? Kevin Patton is a guy who could impact this team with his rim protection. He's a good help side defender. He's got active hands. I don't want to fully throw out the Anton Watson comparison because that's too strong of a comparison in terms of actual on-ball pressure defense. Very few have been as good as Anton Watson. His active hands, his ability to knock the ball loose was otherworldly. But Kevin Patton's a similar size, similar figure, similar form, and a better shot blocker than Anton Watson. He's just not quite as good of an overall on-ball defender, but there's a lot to like in the profile of Kevin Patton. And I think the kind of player that could fly under the radar, the kind of player that, oh, Gonzaga lands Kevin Patton Jr. and it was like, okay, fine. Like, that's good. And then he ends up being a guy who plays, he'll be a little bit like Innocente, where it's like, didn't garner a lot of attention out of the transfer portal. It wasn't the big storyline for Gonzaga last year. It wasn't Innocente. It was obviously Battle and Ajayi. And yet Kevin Patton could kind of be that same thing, where at the end of this offseason, he's the third, fourth transfer we're talking about, but he ends up having a really good year. And then there's a lot of excitement about what he could potentially bring for his senior year. I could absolutely see a trajectory like that happening. As of right now, I have not heard or seen any indication of other programs that are interested in Kevin Patton. No announcement has been made about visits he's planning to take or schools that have reached out. Again, by the time you're listening to this, that might change. Things move very fast in the transfer portal era, but I'm really interested if Gonzaga will make a move here, because I think this is a player that could really thrive in Mark Few's system, and I think is not so, again, with like Wesley Yates would certainly thrive in Gonzaga's system, but he'll thrive anywhere, and Kentucky's already sniffing around. Patton's not necessarily getting that kind of attention, and I think could really pop in Gonzaga's system. So I'm really hopeful that Mark Few and the staff will give him a serious look, because I think it could be a great fit for both sides. Well, folks, we know the national championship matchup is officially set. Florida, Houston. What an incredible day on Saturday of Final Four action, by the way. 2 incredible games. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about some familiar faces between these two teams. We're also going to talk a little bit about Mark Few not being selected for the Hall of Fame class of 2025. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where the heck did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's pretty easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money, it's not just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. My wife and I always want to make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to our finances. And thankfully, with Monarch Money, managing money with your partner smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, you can set goals, and you can stay on the same page without all the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout for monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from talking about players transferring out of USC that Gonzaga could pursue in the portal to instead talk about tonight's national championship matchup, as well as a brief update on Mark Few's quest for the Hall of Fame. Florida Gators taking on the Houston Cougars for the national championship Monday tonight, 5:50 p.m. Pacific time. The game will be broadcast on CBS. FanDuel favoring the Gators in this one by 1.5 points. For those of you who are listeners of Locked On College Basketball, we've given you a ton of previews and predictions and thoughts and odds and everything on this game, whether you're listening to Locked On College Basketball or the bracket breakdown as part of Amazon Fire TV. We have a ton of little 10-minute videos, 15, 20-minute videos that have been produced for Amazon Fire. If you have a Fire TV stick, plug it in, check out the bracket breakdown page. You'll see a ton of videos with my face on them. Definitely give them a listen if you have not done so yet. Saturday, incredible pair of games between Florida and Auburn and Duke and Houston. Florida Auburn, Walter Clayton Jr. went absolutely nuclear. He's having one of the all-time great runs in the NCAA tournament, became the first player to score 30 in a Final Four game since Carmelo Anthony in 2003, which, by the way, Carmelo Anthony just inducted into the Hall of Fame. We'll talk about that in a second. He became the first player since Larry Bird in 1979 to have back-to-back 30-point games in the Elite Eight and Final Four. Walter Clayton Jr. is having literally a historic run through this NCAA tournament. The Gators back in the national championship for the first time since 2007 when they were led by then head coach Billy Donovan, who also just got his name inducted into the Hall of Fame alongside Carmelo Anthony. Just a serendipitous moment for that to happen on the same day that Florida punched their ticket to the national championship. Meanwhile, Houston, I cannot believe that Houston won this basketball game, folks. They were down like 9-10, pretty much the entire game against Duke. They were down 10 with 3 minutes to go. They were down, I think, 9 with like 2 minutes and 10 seconds to go. They won a 7-0 run that eclipsed just 15 seconds of game time. Just an incredible run for Houston. They took a lead. They hadn't led since it was 6-5 until they led again for the next time with 19 seconds to go. I'm not kidding when I say they were trailing this entire basketball game, found a way to win. Kelvin Sampson, the Cougs, in the national championship, going for their first ever natty, back in the championship for the first time since the 80s. Really tremendous stuff to see Sampson and this Cougars team be here after a close game against Gonzaga, as we all know, in the round of 32. They needed that incredible blob play to get past Purdue in the Sweet 16, handled their business against Tennessee in the Elite Eight. Now, with this win over Duke, now they're back in that championship. In terms of some familiar faces, obviously Gonzaga is pretty familiar with this Houston team, having played them just a few weeks ago. Kelvin Sampson, former Washington State head coach, was very, very complimentary of Gonzaga, of Mark Few, talked about how much he respects him, gave a big old hug to Khalif Battle after his last shot or last possession did not go the way that he wanted it to. Was really, I think, endeared himself to a lot of Gonzaga fans just by how he spoke with reverence towards the program and how he handled that win. I can't speak for everybody. I'm sure there's some people out there who do not want to see Houston win. Sure, that's fine. But I kind of have even more respect for Sampson in that program after how that whole thing went down. So that's kind of the Houston side of things. LJ Cryer was a player that was on that Baylor team that beat Gonzaga in the 2021 national championship. He was a true freshman at that time, didn't play a huge role necessarily, but does have some championship experience going into this game against Florida, a team that is littered with familiar faces for Gonzaga fans. Todd Golden, of course, the head coach at San Francisco for 3 years, formerly played at St. Mary's under Coach Randy Bennett. So he's played against Gonzaga at St. Mary's. He coached against Gonzaga for 3 years at San Francisco, got that head coaching job at Florida, and has been incredibly successful these last 2 years. 2 out of his 3 years, he's been very successful at that head coaching position. We also have former Gonzaga walk-on Will Graves, the son of Kelly Graves, a longtime Gonzaga women's basketball coach who's now the head coach at Oregon. Will Graves is a graduate assistant at Florida. He is in his 3rd Final Four to an extent. He was on the Final Four roster for Gonzaga back in 2021. So he was in the Final Four as a player, in a national championship as a player. And then he was supporting Coach Kelly Graves and their run to the Final Four at Oregon. So he was there kind of as a fan, as a family member of sorts. And then now he's back in a graduate assistant sort of coaching capacity for Florida. So there's a good article by Jim Meehan of the Spokesman Review, kind of interviewing Will Graves and talking about the various Final Fours that he's been a part of in his career. And it's a pretty good read. Definitely check it out if you have not done so yet. The other thing I'd mention with these two teams before we get into the Mark Few of it all, both teams have a healthy mix of homegrown talent and transfers, something I think Gonzaga does a pretty good job of. Gonzaga is not overly reliant on the transfer portal, but they're also not doing what Shaka Smart at Marquette and Matt Painter at Purdue, where they're just rejecting it outright. They are doing it. There's a healthy mix of bringing in transfers to supplement spots on the roster that need it, while also having homegrown talent, the Ben Greggs, the Nolan Hickmans, the Braden Huffs of the world. And then you have, of course, your Ryan Nembhard, your Graham Ekes, your Khalif Battles in the transfer portal. That's kind of what these rosters look like to an extent. Florida has Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, Micah Handlockton, Ruben Chinyelu. They're all transfers. Alex Condon, Thomas Houck, Will Riley, all guys who developed in that system. Houston's a little bit more developmentally focused than transfer focused, but LJ Cryer and Milos Uzan, arguably their 2 best players, were both added via the transfer portal as well. So they're both older teams. I think that's a huge key in the modern era of college basketball. Florida's the 60th oldest team. I think Houston's the 39th oldest team. And then I think the last stat that I'll mention is that Gonzaga is now 3 years in a row lost to a team that plays in the national championship. They lost to UConn in the Elite Eight 2 years ago. UConn, of course, won the championship that year. Last year, they lost to Purdue, who went to that championship and lost to UConn. And then this year, they lost to Houston, who's now in the national championship against Florida. Just the way that it happens for Gonzaga, they lost the Elite Eight 1 year, the Sweet 16 1 year, the round of 32 1 year, but all 3 of those years, the team that they played either finished first or second overall on the season. Just tough luck for Mark Few and the Zags. Speaking of Mark Few, did not make the Hall of Fame his first go-round on the ballot. We talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago. In February was when it was revealed the finalists for the class of 2025. I think there was like 17 finalists. 9 of them were North American finalists, and Mark Few was on that list. Dwight Howard on the list, Carmelo Anthony on the list, Billy Donovan on the list. We mentioned him. Trio of fantastic women's basketball players, Sue Bird, Maya Moore, and Sylvia Fowles, all on that list. Few did not make it. They went with the coach that they went with was Billy Donovan. They're not limited to only picking one coach, but Donovan does have 2 national championships at the collegiate level, successful coaching at Florida and at Kentucky, has been a solid coach in the NBA as well. If you look at his most recent success with the Chicago Bulls, you're going to be like, this dude's in the Hall of Famer and Mark Few's not, but back-to-back championships is unheard of. It's extremely rare. So Billy Donovan, I think, is a fully deserving candidate. And again, it's not necessarily that Donovan is the reason Mark Few didn't make it, but they did only go with one coach. Certainly Dwight Howard, Carmelo Anthony, and the 3 women's basketball players were all kind of obvious slam dunk, no doubt. You got to get them into the Hall of Fame type players. So I understand that. For Mark Few, I think it'll happen soon. I think it might happen as soon as next year, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a member of the 2026 class. I was hopeful he'd make it this year, but not incredibly optimistic. I'm also somebody who hasn't paid a ton of attention to the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame and their voting kind of tendencies. I know I follow the Baseball Hall of Fame, and they're pretty resistant to allowing first-time, like people who are on the ballot for the first time, to make the Hall of Fame right away. They kind of consider that the inner circle and are more resistant to voting them in. Maybe there was a little bit of that in this case, where it's like, okay, well, Dwight and Melo are for sure first ballot Hall of Famers. Is Mark Few? I'm not sure. And whatever. I don't think it matters all that much. I doubt Coach Few is up in arms about it too much. We'll see what happens in 2026, but it's going to happen. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. There's zero doubt in my mind that he will make the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame in the next 3 or 4 years at worst. And I wouldn't be surprised if it happens in 2026. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. I want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Give a special shout out to those everyday listeners. We'll be back going forward this week. We'll get some more transfer portal coverage. Of course, we're going to continue to talk season in review episodes as well. We had Khalif Battle last week. We're going to continue to do those as we are removed from this season. We'll also keep you up to date on this national championship game tonight. If you're watching, enjoy, have fun. Hope whoever you're rooting for ends up getting the W there. Appreciate every single one of you. And of course, as always, even on national championship day, got to say go Zags.